The beauty of the Culture series is that there's no correct way of reading them. Iain M. Banks died in 2013 of gallbladder cancer before he could write what would have been a 10th novel. The books we do have were written across 25 years with no master plan binding them together. He hoped to leave his friend Ken MacLeod enough notes to write the final novel himself, but the cancer moved too fast, and those notes were never written. As it stands, each Culture novel is a standalone. You can pick them up in any order, any way you want, and the story will work. But that doesn't mean that some books aren't better at introducing the series than others. So if you're coming to the Culture for the first time and wondering where to start, this video is for you. Appease our engagement overlords. Hit the like and subscribe button to bring me one step closer to taking over the Galaxies. The most obvious option is to just read the books in the order Banks wrote them. I first read the Culture books in publication order, and I think it's probably the best way of doing it if you're brand new and you're a purist, because you watch Banks's vision of the Culture grow as he wrote it. The early books, they're tighter and more focused on individual stories. Then the later books are denser and more philosophical. They're more concerned with what the Culture actually is and what it's for. Reading in publication order lets you trace that arc. This is how readers first experienced the Culture, with each book arriving years after the last, and the conversation around the series was shaped by what came before it. That said, there's also a case against publication order, and it might be stronger. Consider Phlebas is the first novel, and it's kind of a weird introduction to the series. It's about Bora Horza Gobachal, a shape-shifting mercenary who works for the Culture's greatest enemy, the Adherents, a race of fierce warrior zealots. There's also space pirates, dead planets, and an interesting cast of characters, including cannibals. It's an awesome book. But it's also bloated in places, and the protagonist being a Culture enemy rather than a Culture insider, it really throws people through a loop after hearing so much about the Culture itself. And I know of at least two people who started with Consider Phlebas, bounced off it, and then never returned to the rest of the series. And it's kind of a tragedy in a way, because the next book, The Player of Games, is one of the best in the series. The Culture novels cluster into rough thematic groups, and you can build a reading order around whichever themes pull at you the hardest. There's a war and intervention cluster made up of Consider Phlebas, use of weapons, and Look to Windward, and then to a lesser extent Matter. These are books about what happens when the Culture's good intentions collide with the rest of the galaxy. And then there's a games and politics cluster with The Player of Games, Matter, and parts of Inversions. These are books about civilization structured around competition, hierarchy, and ritual, and what the Culture looks like when it walks into rooms like that. There's also one chapter in Consider Phlebas that this applies to, but it's just kind of secondary to the story. There's also a death and afterlife cluster, which is probably the most interesting thematic grouping, but is made up of later novels. It includes Surface Detail, The Hydrogen Sonata, and Look to Windward. Surface Detail is literally about virtual hells. It asks what happens when a civilization has the technology to torture the dead, and what the Culture should do about it. The Hydrogen Sonata is about subliming, the Culture term for transcending physical existence into a higher plane, and what it means for an entire civilization to choose to leave the universe behind. Then Look to Windward is about grief and atonement and the long aftermath of war. These three books together form Banks's meditation on mortality, and reading them in a sequence is one of the most rewarding things you can do as a Culture reader. But again, they're made up of later novels, so you have to keep that in mind. And then lastly, there's a Minds cluster. Now, Accession more than any other novel is about the minds, but also Look to Windward and parts of the Hydrogen Sonata. In most of these books, AI minds are background characters, but in these ones, they're protagonists. Accession in particular is the book where Banks lets the minds take over, and they just kind of talk to each other and you get to see their personalities, and it's pretty fascinating to read. Now, the thematic approach works well if you already have a sense of what you want from the culture, but it works less well as a starting point because you don't always know what theme will hook you until you've sampled at least a few of the novels. Now, I've already said that the culture is made up of mostly standalone novels, but it does have a small recurring cast that surfaces across multiple books. Sama appears in Use of Weapons and State of the Art. She's a special circumstances agent and probably the most fully realized human character in the series. So if you find her compelling, those two books pair really well together. The minds recur everywhere, and you can think of them as characters in their own right. The one thing to keep in mind as you read about the minds is that they're described and consider Phlebas as being so smart that humans can't even begin to comprehend their level of intelligence. And that's part of what makes it really interesting to read about them. Each ship in the series has its own personality, sense of humor, and grudges. The mind names alone, so much for subtlety. Of course I still love you. Sleeper Service. They're some of my favorite running jokes in science fiction. If you fall in love with the ships, Accession is your book. And from there, everything else, it just kind of adds to it. Then there are the outsiders. Banks loved writing protagonists who weren't culture citizens, who were either enemies of the culture, like Horza in Consider Phlebas, or instruments of it, like Zakalwe in Use of Weapons. The outsider perspective is one of Banks's favorite tools because it lets him show the culture from the outside, which is often the only way to see it clearly. It's why I still think reading Consider Phlebas is one of the best ways to start the series. A character-driven reading order would probably look something like starting with the Player of Games for a culture insider, moving to Use of Weapons for an instrument of the culture, then Consider Phlebas for an enemy of it. Then State of the Art to follow Sma, and the rest based on whichever character types you've connected with. The Culture series spans a much wider range of structural ambition than most people expect going in, and where you start matters a lot, especially if you're the kind of reader who bounces off challenging books. Banks wrote everything from clean, propulsive adventures to one of the most inventive novels I've read in science fiction, so knowing what you're walking into helps. Think of the series in 3 rough tiers. The accessible tier is probably the Player of Games and the State of the Art. Player of Games is linear and deliberately designed to show you the culture from the inside. It doesn't ask anything unusual from you structurally. The State of the Art is a short story collection with pieces that are short and self-contained, and then the title novella is just, it's easily readable. Then we move into the moderate tier. This is Consider Phlebas, Look to Windward, Surface Detail, and Matter. And it's because they're longer and denser, but also conventionally structured. Consider Phlebas is a big adventure novel. Look to Windward and Surface Detail are weighty, but they're linear. Matter has a lot of moving parts, but follows them in a straightforward way. And then finally we move into the challenging tier. 3 books in the series that are just a little bit more demanding. Use of Weapons runs 2 timelines simultaneously, one moving forward in time and one moving backward, and they converge at the end on a single revelation. If you go in without knowing this, the backward timeline, it can be a little bit disorienting. Accession spends long stretches entirely inside the communications of AI ships, with no human-level viewpoint character to anchor you. For readers who love AI fiction, this can be seen as a feature. For readers expecting well-thought-out human protagonists, it might be a wall. Inversions tells this entire story through characters who don't know they're in a culture novel. Banks never confirms what the reader comes to understand. The whole novel runs on implication, and it only works if you've already read enough of the series to fill in what the characters can't see. On to my personal recommendation. Here's the order I'd recommend to a friend who's never read Banks. Both of my previous readings were in publication order, so that's what I've historically recommended, and I loved it, but it might not be the most accessible path. First up is the Player of Games. Start here. This is the best introduction to the culture. It lays out contact and special circumstances, the two factions whose work makes up most of the series. The protagonist, Gurge, is a normal culture citizen, which means you see the culture from inside, the way most of its inhabitants see it. The writing is clean, the plot is a lot of fun, and the moral questions serve as a precursor to what comes later in the series. It's also pretty short, so you won't spend too much time reading it if you don't like it. Next up is Consider Phlebas. Yes, the weakest book for many. But the war in this novel is the only conflict in the series where the culture is fighting an opponent at roughly its own level. It's also the first book chronologically, which means reading it second gives you the historical foundation for everything that follows. After Player of Games has shown you the inside of the culture, Consider Phlebas shows you what it looks like from the outside, from the perspective of an enemy who genuinely hates it. That contrast is valuable as you make your way through the other books. After two heavier books, you need a break, and Accession is it. This might be the most fun book in the series. It's also the best introduction to the Minds. Now, the human level characters in Accession, they're serviceable at best. But the book is really about the ships, their gossip, their rivalries, and their conspiracies. If you fall in love with Banks' ships in Accession, you'll fall in love with the rest of the series. In my very first video on YouTube, I think I called Use of Weapons my favorite science fiction novel. Well, either that or Ubik by Philip K. Dick. And it's structurally ambitious in a way that some readers find difficult. It alternates two timelines, with one moving forward and one moving backward, and they don't converge until a single revelation at the end. The protagonist, Sakawe, is an outsider used by special circumstances as a weapon, which means you see the culture's interventionist policies from the perspective of the instrument doing the intervening. It's a brutal, beautiful book. The State of the Art is a short story collection, but worth reading as a unit. The title novella shows the culture making first contact with Earth in 1977, and then deciding what to do about us. Once you have a working sense of the culture from the previous four books, this collection is where you get to see how it relates to our actual world. It also brings back Dizius Ma from the Use of Weapons, which gives those two books kind of like a quiet through line. Inversions is kind of a weird one. It's a culture novel where none of the viewpoint characters know they're in a culture novel. The story takes place on a medieval tech planet, and two of the characters are clearly culture agents working undercover, but Banks never spells it out. The reader has to put it together. This pairs beautifully with State of the Art because once you've seen the culture look at Earth, you can imagine what it would feel like to be one of those Earth citizens, unaware that you're being looked at. Now, an important warning. Inversions will not work if you haven't read the other books. The whole novel runs on a gap between what the characters know and what you know. And if you don't know enough, the gap collapses. So just don't read this one first. Matter is a strange one for me, because I love the concepts in it, but I don't think the book itself is as good as the others before it. The Shell World setting, it's great. The political intrigue is fun, but the ending is divisive. It's not a bad novel, it's just that the others are better. After Inversions, Matter gets you back into the rhythm of spending time with ships and drones, and prepares you for the much stronger books that follow. I can't remember exactly where I first heard it, but someone called these next three books the Death and Afterlife trilogy, and it's a great name for it. Surface Detail is about virtual hells, the question of what an advanced civilization owes the digital minds being tortured in simulated afterlives, and the war that breaks out over the right to keep running them. It's morally serious in a way that builds on everything you've read so far, and it features one of the best villains in the series. The Hydrogen Sonata is the last novel Banks wrote, and it's about subliming, what it means for an entire civilization to choose to leave physical existence behind for something they deem better. After Surface Detail showed you a constructed afterlife, the Hydrogen Sonata shows you a real one, or as close to a real one as the science of the culture universe gets. It's a quieter, more contemplative book than most of the series, and reading it knowing that it's Banks' last novel, I don't know, it adds a layer of meaning to the book that it never asked for. Here's the one I think you should finish on. Look to Windward is about grief, atonement, and the long shadow of the Adiran War. It pairs directly with Consider Phlebas, both in title and in subject matter. Reading Look to Windward last gives you a chance to look back at the war you read about in Book 2, from inside the civilization you've now spent 10 books getting to know. It's, in my opinion, the most satisfying possible ending to the series. There are a few things to keep in mind as you read, and the first of which is to just take your time. These are dense books with intricate plots and a lot of strange names. You don't need to understand everything on the first read. I certainly didn't, and some of the things I missed the first time around have become my favorite details after subsequent readings. Second, the culture is not utopia in the way utopia is usually written. It's a society without scarcity or hierarchy, but Banks is constantly probing around its dark edges. What does intervention look like when you're sure you're right? What do you do with people who don't want what you want for them? What does death mean when it's optional? The novels are arguments with the culture as much as they're celebrations of it. That's the part that makes them last. Third, and it should be obvious, but you don't have to follow my order. If you're a publication order purist, go for it. If you want to start with Accession because you love AI fiction, that's a fine place to start. If you want to read them by length, by mood, by cover art, by the alphabetical order of the ship's names, none of that is wrong. The books were built to be readable in any order, and the only real rule is that inversions doesn't work first. What it comes down to is this: pick up the Player of Games, or whichever book is calling to you, and just start reading. The Culture is one of the most rewarding extended works of science fiction we have, and the entry fee is just a willingness to spend a few hundred pages with people and ships who think very differently from you. Welcome to The Culture. Alright guys, that's my guide to reading the Culture series. I'd love to hear how you read it, whether you went in publication order, jumped around a bit, or built your own path. Drop your reading order in the comments, and if you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. I'm starting my third reread of the series, so I expect I'll be doing a lot more Culture content in the near future. I already have some ideas on a deeper dive into what the Culture actually is, and standalone essays on individual books. Now, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, and even your enemies. And of course, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because every subscriber inches me one step closer to taking over the galaxies. Until next time, take care, keep reading, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.